In terms of the Barton-Sartorius family, I just want to say very briefly, it's been my own pleasure to work and meet and work with three generations. Anthony Barton, whom many of you know, is Damien's grandfather. Lillian Barton-Sartorius is his mother. And of course, then there's Damien and his sister um, Melanie, who are the basically the up and coming third generation. And so, with that, I will turn it over to Damien for us to learn more about the chateau, the terroir, the wines, and anything else he'd like to tell us.
Thank you very
Damien.
much, Eric. Thank you for what's a wonderful introduction. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, everyone, for organizing this. Again, a big bravo to Eric to Scott for organizing these samples, as customs were definitely not a big help. Um, I'm going to talk about the history, of course. I'm very happy to be with you tonight. The family Barton started already 300 years ago plus with Thomas Barton. So interestingly, we were not French, we were not English, we were Irish. And before the French Revolution, Thomas Barton started in 1725 Negos. The idea was to ship wine around on boats. It was very useful to have neutral countries such as Ireland to move wine around, um, because France and England was at war, so and many other countries in Europe. So it was very useful to have this kind of shipment around. Anyway, no point buying land at that time because before the French Revolution, someone not French could not buy land. Well, he could, but it would go back to the children. So no point buying land. William, we don't really talk about him because he spent his time suing everyone in the region. But Hugh got quite a high interest in the wine business as well. So he bought Longueur Barton in 1821, and that's how we started really owning a chateau. Then in 1826, the vineyard of Léoville, which was only one, got split. Maybe some of you know the three Léovilles: Léoville Préféré, Léoville Lascaz, and Léoville Barton. All this used to be just Léoville, and it used to belong to Marquis Lascaz. Being a marquis during the French Revolution, not a great position to be in. They would usually leave the prison in two bits: the head on one side, the body on the other. He got his head, left prison, and were able to get his vineyard back that was confiscated. Not having enough money to buy all of it, he asked my ancestor, already had Longueur, to buy part of the vineyard, look after it, and maybe he'll buy it back later. So suddenly, in 1826, there was Léoville Barton and Léoville, and that's it. That was for 3 years. And then about 20 years later, this marquis had a granddaughter that married a Mr. Préféré and a grandson that kept the main name Lascaz. So this is how you got Léoville Préféré and Léoville Lascaz. So then we go down and actually, and Hugh is the last one who was looking after the chateau. Hugh did not have any children, so he passed it over to Anthony, my grandfather. The reason why Anthony had it's because he failed his exams at Cambridge. So he came to help his uncle in Bordeaux, and his uncle said, "Well, I have no children, so since you don't have anything else to do, why don't you look after it?" And my grandfather hesitated, and then thought, "Well, I quite like the job, so let's continue." So it's quite, and then so then my mother, and now it's my sister and me who look after the property. And in 2011, we bought Chateau Mobizen Barton. Mobizen Barton is based in Moulis um, and is a real gem. I'll talk about it in a couple of minutes. This is not Chateau Léoville Barton. This is Chateau Longueur Barton, because Léoville Barton is only vineyards. But what is very strange, if you look at the little bottles of Léoville, this chateau is on the label. We don't fully understand who took the decision to put Chateau Longueur on the label of Léoville Barton, but there you go. So you'll know a bit more. But we are the only chateau to have two classified growers under the same roof. So in 1855, when the classification happened, Langlois-Barton was classified third and Léville second. And the vineyard has not changed since. So some chateaus have bought land and got bigger. Our land is exactly the same as it used to be during the classification. Why don't we open a little bottle so we can, so you don't die of thirst while I talk about Mobizen. Maybe start with Mobizen 2012. I love maps. I hope everyone will follow this. So we say Bordeaux is near the ocean. It is near the ocean, but not immediately. So the ocean Atlantic. And we have this river, the Gironde, which is actually an estuary, which is very, very important because being an estuary, there's tide going in and out, and it's a massive bit of water that's always cool when it's hot and always warm when it's cold. And it's really along this river that you find most of the left bank. Of course, the big region being Margaux, Saint-Julien, Pauillac, Saint-Estèphe. You see all of them are along the river. There's also Haut-Médoc in purple and Médoc in green. And there's two little appellations that are a bit less famous than the others. The orange one, which is Moulis, and the blue one, which is Listrac. In Moulis, there's some quite famous other chateaux like Chaspline, Pougeot, or Mocaillou. So we bought Mobizen there. Let me explain a little bit the geology of Bordeaux. So the city of Bordeaux is around there. The left bank is here, the right bank is here, and you can see the right bank, the color is totally different. So the reason for this is what you see in Entre-deux-Mers and right bank is mainly limestone. Limestone is about 34 million years old soil. So it's a soil that used to be under the ocean with lots of little shells that accumulated and turned into stone. And this is Saint-Emilion on the right bank. On top of this, there's a layer of clay. And the left bank is totally different. We have the soil that's only 1.8 million years old, well, more or less 1 million years old. So it's very recent in terms of geology. And this soil is actually deposits from the last glacier periods. So during the last million and a half years, lots of glacier periods came, it froze, then it melted, and as it melted, it deposited stones that it took between this, between the Gironde Bordeaux region where the glacier would hit the ocean, and the Pyrenees, where it would grab all the little stones on the way. But where Mobizen is, in Moulis, it's actually this blob there, which is orange and yellow. And what did I say on the right bank? The yellow and orange, it's limestone and clay on top. So yes, where's Mobizen in Moulis? We are on the left bank, but because I hate to make too many generalities, otherwise it would be too easy for you. We are on a very Saint-Emilion kind of soil there with Mobizen. It's limestone and clay. So because of this, ideally we want to plant Merlot on this kind of soil because it keeps the freshness, it keeps the acidity, and Merlot likes to ripen really fast. So that slows the maturity of the Merlot, which develops elegance, finesse, and of course, lots of complexity. So the reason why I chose 12 and 18 is because 2012 is the first vintage we did entirely, because 11, we didn't look after the grapes. We bought in August, so we didn't have the full control of the vintage. And then 18 is one of the last one we did, and to me, one of the best. So this is why I thought it would be very interesting to have both, to really see the gap. Of course, as well, 18 is a vintage which is much riper and warmer in Bordeaux. So yes, there is a big difference in quality, but the vintage does help a little bit as well. Let me grab you a little, if I'm not being too geeky, but I know you're Commander in Bordeaux, so I'm sure you already know a lot. So let me try to take you through a bit more. So I'm going to take you through the map of Moulis, so you can see how complex it is. So Chateau Mobizen is here, and over here you see all these colors are all different soil. Saint-Julien, where only gravels, that's here. We have gravels, we have sand, we have clay with gravel, we have clay with sand. Marne is very famous, it's clay with limestone, bits of limestone in it. So we have a bit of Marne. We have also a bit of clay and limestone. and we have a bit of sand, and we have, and what is quite funny, there's this kind of soil that's called Barton clay. So, which is just pure coincidence, and Mobizen has this kind of Barton clay. So we're here on the other end. This is where you find Chateau Pujol, Chateau Maucaillou, and Chasseline, and these are really on deep gravel. So these will have Cabernet Sauvignon dominant, while we have Merlot. Maybe shall I show you a little picture of Mobizen? So there's a picture on the label, but it's so small. Let me show you a proper photo of the vineyard, well, of the chateau. It's really a gem. It's close from Bordeaux. It's fairly close as well from Saint-Julien, and we really fell in love with it because it's full of trees. There's a real life around this place, and if you're ever in Bordeaux, please come and visit us.
And what percent of the cépage at Mobizen is Merlot?
About 50% of Mobizen is Merlot.
Wow.
So we're not yet Petrus that has 100%, but we have quite a high percentage. And because we have this limestone and clay, what is great is we have very good Cabernet Franc. And for the left bank, that is quite rare. So we have usually in a blend between 15 and 20% Cabernet Franc. It doesn't sound a lot, but for us, it's for the left bank, it's a lot. And usually in Leuville or Langlois, there is not as much at all. So yes, there is Cabernet Franc in 2012. There's also, of course, Cabernet Sauvignon, about 26%, usually, more or less 25%. And a little bit of Petit Verdot. And in 2012, we even had like 5 rows of Cabernet, but I doubt it shows in the wine at all. But it's there.
Is there a difference in the blend between the 2012 and the 2018 of any significance?
Not a big significance. There is one, but I would lie to you if I would need to invent them to give you the exact blend. But it's usually very similar.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
So is the difference between the market difference in taste between the 12 and the 18 really just a question of age?
Not only a question of age. The vintage has a big impact, but also the quality of the vineyards. When we bought in 2011, the vineyard was very, very tired. And thank God, when we give lots of attention to the vineyard, to the plant, they give it back, but it takes time. So, I think we really reached a big gap of quality in 2014. Where we started to get the first results of our efforts in the vineyards, and then year after year, we still feel we're climbing steps. So there's definitely a lot of results from all the effort we put in the vineyards, plus the vintage effect.
Thanks.
Pleasure.
Damien, there's a question in the chat about the alcohol levels and the differences between the two, and whether that was just the weather or whether that was a style choice.
Oh, it's definitely the weather. Yes, 2018 was a very warm vintage, and actually quite a lot of wines in Bordeaux are very high in alcohol and tend to lack a little bit of acidity. It's similar to 2003. It's a very very warm, very open vintage. And where we are lucky with Mobizen, there's a lot of water underneath. Because of this limestone and clay, it's holding out lots of water. I showed you the picture of the chateau, and you see there's a little pond in front, and it's very shallow. I can, if I get into it, it's only up to my like just above my knees, because this limestone is just underneath, and it's really a hard rock. So so there's a lot of water, which means that in 2018, even on a warm vintage, it's still very balanced, and that's great. But when on a wet vintage, then it tends to be a bit more difficult. No, we can't have everything. Yeah, so it's and that's when, to me, what makes me very interested in wine is the sense of terroir, how you can feel and taste in the wine its origin. So I'm glad that these kind of laws are there, so you can really keep this terroir shining in the wine. Shall I move on to Saint-Julien? Yeah, cool, excellent. Let's go. So let me go back to my favorite maps. Up, Saint-Julien. So you can see how small it is. Saint-Julien is only on this kind of layer here, Q1. So it's a small appellation, very close from the river, on pure gravels. You can see that all the appellation there are little plateaus. Of course, Pauillac has not been drawn, but it's just next to it here. Talking about terroir, let me show you this picture so you understand how close the vineyards are from the river and how wide the river is. So you can see this is an island in the middle of the river. So the river is very, very wide, which means that it's such a mass of water that when there's a tide, it generates air movement. If there's air movement, that means there's air going through the vineyards. Believe it or not, but our problem in Bordeaux is excess of water. So global warming for us has an impact, but the impact is not lacking of water. We always have excess of water. That's our enemy. So we need to deal with excess of water. Having this wind helps us a lot. It dries the vineyards because water generates mildew, water generates rot. So if we deal with this humidity, we deal with all the problems that we need to, that we would like to get rid of, like spraying and stuff like this. So being near the river helps us a lot. Also, because it's near the river, the water takes lots of time to fit the temperature of the air. So in the morning when it's very cold, the temperature of the river is always warmer. So this is why on years when there's a lot of frost, the vineyards near the river never frost, because this river shines its heat to the vineyards. Likewise, when it's very hot, the river is always cooler. And I'm being cold or being hot, I'm talking about 5, sometimes 10 degrees difference, degrees Celsius. So it is quite a lot of difference. So in 2018 or we're going to have Langlois 2009 next, which is a warm vintage. We still have a lot of acidity, and that's really thanks to this river. So when we talk about terroir, of course, yes, the soil is important, but what is around has just as much importance. And this river is huge, and you can see how close we are. So of course, this is one of our vineyards, Léoville, next to the village of Saint-Julien, and then behind there's the vineyard of Léoville-Lascaz, and then the distance there's Chateau Latour. So you see all these great names are all very close from each other. On the other side of the road there's Léoville-Poiferré. So we're all one next to the other.
I have a question for you related to the proximity of the vineyards to the river. With climate change and sea level rise, do you guys have models that show that there may be a negative impact with regard to those vineyards that are right next to the river? I don't know how far above sea level that is.
Vineyard loss is not a concern of, well, let me show you this one. So you see what is in light green there. This is all the soil that's between the river and the first vineyards. There's quite some land, and then the rise is quite steep. Well, steep, in terms of Bordeaux, it's not Burgundy or Alsace, but there is a bit of a bump. So we might lose these, but honestly, there's still some time. But someplace further north in Médoc might lose some vineyards. Yes, definitely. Maybe you can taste, if you haven't done it yet, Langlois 9 and Langlois 16. I thought it would be interesting to put what are to me 2 great vintages next to the other in a very different style. 2009 is vintage that's very warm, very ripe, similar to, well, to my mind, similar to 2003 or 2018. And usually great vintage tend to go into a more austere moment where it tends to be a bit more shy and close a little bit. This kind of vintage, they're wonderful because they're always shining. They never, because they're so ripe, they rarely get into this austere period. So 9 is excellent for this. And where lots of 2009 are already getting a bit tired, we're lucky to have this great terroir, and we keep this acidity because yes, we have the gravel that drains very well, but underneath the gravel there's clay, and you can see how close we are from the river. The old vines have roots that are long, as long as 10, 15 meters, so that they can reach the water table with no problem. So it's this perfect combination of gravel on top and clay underneath with water availability that makes the terroir of Saint-Julien so perfect. So it is a lot easier to make great wine than this kind of terroir. And then next to this, the 2016. So 2016 is the vintage where Léoville got classified #1 by WineSpec. And it's a vintage that I love from the very first day. It's, to me, it's pure elegance. It's maybe not as exuberant, but it's so fine, it's so elegant and dense at the same time. Sometimes we can talk about vintage being delicate when it's a light vintage like 2013. But what I find fascinating in 16, there's a lot of acidity, there's a lot of tannin, there's a lot of aromas, and all of this is just so fine, so elegant, so vertical. And yes, I love this vintage for this. It's really one of my favorites of all times. So Langlois, let me get back to a little map. The terroir of Langlois and Léoville are very different. They're touching, but they're not at all on the same place. So Léoville Barton Vineyards is this block, it's these blocks, big block here. And then Léoville Préféré has a big block over here, and then actually just outside, and then Léoville Lascaz has a block on the other side of the village. So really most of this, almost, I would say like 95% of all this are the 3 Léovilles. Then at the back you have Chateau Talbot, but most of its vineyard, it's just the 2 blocks in front that his. Then behind, he has his vineyards. And then Langlois actually has some vineyards there next to Du Cros-Beaucaillou and Béchevel, some vineyards behind there, and actually quite a lot of vineyards on this side, and just on the beginning at the bottom of the plateau of Saint-Julien. So Langlois is very diverse because it's got top of plateau, lower bit of plateau of Béchevel, so north facing, south facing on the beginning of plateau of Saint-Julien. So to me, Langlois is really a picture of what Saint-Julien is, because it has a bit of all the terroir, but at the same time, we're very lucky that most of its soils, most of the vineyards are close from the river. So we benefit from the river by having all the different soils. So it's really, it's very typical to me. But Langlois is only 20 hectares. So this is why maybe some of you are not as used to Langlois as you can do with Léoville, because it's really smaller and not as famous. Léoville is, so over here, really top of plateau, deep gravels. So because of this variation of terroir, Langlois being lower you get on the plateau, more sand and clay and finer gravels you get. So Langlois was still dominated by Cabernet, of course, but we'll have a bit more Merlot, as Léoville is mainly on this top plateau, and Léoville will be more dominated by, more largely dominated by Cabernet Sauvignon. Langlois about 60% Cabernet Sauvignon, while Léoville 80% Cabernet Sauvignon. And that is really the difference you will get between the two. It's really the terroir that speaks. We do no change at all. There's no, the work on both wines is the same, might it be in vineyards or in the winery. We pick when it's ripe, but when the skin is ripe, because this is what is interesting for us. The sugar is less important, and the aromatic of the pulp is less important. Because we make red wine, the tannins, the skin is really what we look for. So we pick when the skin is ripe, and then If there's enough sugar, then that's great. The global warming has helped us to have this perfect combination of enough sugar, enough aromatic and tannic at the same time. So today it's not a problem because we just have the right amount of alcohol and acidity because we have a lot of Cabernet Sauvignon. If we would have a lot of Merlot, the problem would be different because Merlot have less acidity and a lot more sugar.
Damien, I'd love to have you elaborate a little bit on the 2009 vintage. We're drinking an example here, but in your commentary, you said it's getting a little tired, and I fell in love on the Primeurs in 2009, and I bought a lot of 2009. I figured it would carry me into my old age, but maybe something else is happening.
Well, I said some 2009s. 2009 was very warm. So to me, when the wine lacks of acidity, it lacks of bones. It's actually it's very difficult to have a wine that has freshness and aromas. It's very easy to have a wine that has a lot of aromas. You just go for full maturity, over maturity. But to me, you lose. It has no sense. It's my personal opinion, but it was very trendy for the last 20 years to have these wine that are full-bodied, that are exuberant, but they all taste the same. They all taste of plum. You have no details, no fine aromas anymore. Acidity is key, and it's a lot harder to make a wine that has drinkability and aromas at the same time. A good bottle is an empty bottle. I'm sure you've all seen this with friends. Everybody brings a bottle, and the bottle that people speak the most because it's exuberant. There's a lot of aromas. It's very ripe. It's easy to talk about. It's not always the bottle that's finished first. The bottle that's finished first has maybe less aromas. It may be more discreet, but it's drinkable. The acidity does this. A good bottle is an empty bottle. That's what we believe in.
Damien, there's a question in the chat about the 2008 vintage, so maybe you could compare.
2008 is one of these vintages that people don't talk a lot about. People usually talk a lot about the great vintages or the very difficult vintages, and then in the gap in between, this is where, to me, the best vintages, well, the most interesting vintages are. So 6, 8, 11, 12, 14, these vintage are really worth looking for to me because usually the great vintages, when you open them too young, you tend to miss a little bit from it because they're not fully open. As I said, for example, 2010 at the moment, to me, it's totally closed. They're not showing anything. Or some 2016 are a bit like this, but yes, 2010 is really typical for this. It's closed, and if you open in 2010, you might be disappointed because it's such a myth, but it's too young. So 8 is lovely. It's fully open, and opposite 2013 is lovely at the moment, but it will die soon, while 2008 will still have a life of another 20, 30 years. So these vintages are wonderful for this. Let's move on to Learville, maybe. It's going to be Learville 12 and Learville 17 that we'll taste in that order. And 12, classic. I like it because it's all about the fruit. It's very open. And then 17 in Bordeaux is, to me, a very complex vintage. Not because the vintage was difficult, but because there's a lot of qualities and a lot at different price. And I wanted to show 2017 because for us in Saint-Julien, it's actually a very good vintage. You can buy any Saint-Julien in 2017, you will not be disappointed. The reason why 17 scared people, well, first, there's a 7 in the vintage. So even before the flowering, people are like, oh, 17, it's not going to be good. because I must say we have been quite unlucky because 2007 was not recognized as being quite exceptional. 97 neither. 77 we don't even talk about it. 67 was terrible. 57 most of the vineyard died from the frost of 56. So we need to go back to 47 to have a wonderful vintage. So we have had quite a series. But in 2017 there was a big frost. As I explained earlier, Saint-Julien did not freeze thanks to the river. This estuary protected the vineyard of Saint-Julien. So the vineyards really far away from the river did freeze a little bit, but most of the Grand Terroir did not freeze. And then the rest of the vintage was actually wonderful. We had a very, very good vintage in 2017. There was a big storm early September where a bit of rain fell that diluted a little bit the Merlot, but we're still on an excellent level. It's not considered, it's not a 2016 or 2018, but it's really this much underneath. And because a great vintage needs to be homogeneous throughout Bordeaux, it didn't have the recognition, so it didn't have the price point because the right bank froze a lot, Pessac-Léognan froze a lot. The price was low because humidity was not there, but the quality was wonderful in 17. So this is why I really wanted to show it to you. And also, it's one of the vintage of Léville where there's most Cabernet Sauvignon. This is 93 Cabernet Sauvignon. And lots of people say, oh, but you can't have 100% Cabernet Sauvignon because Merlot is really needed. But actually, when you have a wonderful great variety that planted on the right place, it just works. So yes, there is 7% Merlot, but the impact of the Cabernet is really high. Any questions maybe?
There's a couple in the chat. The first says, along the lines of moving away from the overripe style, the use of high toast du oak seems to be declining. Has your barrel program evolved over the last 10 years? Are you using less traditional options like amphora or Stockinger barrels?
We have been very lucky to make wine that we love and that press and consumers have enjoyed our taste of wine. So in the period where Parker had a big impact and wines were really changed style to suit the palate, because one man in the world was really saying to the entire planet what is good and what is not, but it was only his taste. Because his taste was so important, people started changing their style of wine to suit his palate and to have good points and to sell wine. He never gave us 99 or 100 points, but we always had fairly good points and fairly good critics from him. So we never had to change our style, and that we're very lucky because we never had to change. So that's wonderful. So we did not change our style, and we're not looking forward to do it at any moment soon. And what is even better, the whole world of wine is moving back to what we like, what we always like, which is freshness, acidity, and elegance. We're not anymore into this bulldozer wines. So but people are saying, oh, look how fresh that wine is, and we're like, yeah, we've done this for many years. Have we evolved? What have we changed? Not much, really. It's not really by choice. I think tradition is important to test. Do we really need to stay traditional? Because there's a lot of new things coming up. But at the end of the day, most of the time, tradition is still the best way of doing things. For example, we have changed the sorting line, so we don't sort by hand anymore. It's machines that do it because they do it better. But literally everything else we still do the old way: pruning, de-leafing, even cutting the vineyards. For example, let me pick a picture for you. We trimmed the vines, as you can see, with two big knives. and it's literally like walking through the jungle and trimming in front. And the reason why we do this is because, again, dealing with humidity problems, it's important to have a vine that is very thin. If it's thin, then we have less humidity in the middle. And if we have less humidity in the middle, we have less mushrooms problems, such as mildew. And if we have less mildew, then we don't need to spray. So it's all these steps like this that counts. And nowadays, it's a tractor that comes and trim the vines. The problem by trimming with a tractor, you can only be very large, because if you go finer, then you're going to cut the berries that are at the bottom. By doing it by hand, it's literally a tailor-made cut on all the vines. So this is very traditional, but this takes a lot of time. And of course, because it takes time, salaries in France are high, it's expensive. But thank God we can, because we're lucky to sell the bottles expensive enough that we can cover these costs. Also, barrel aging, we still rack barrel to barrel from what we call this cube. So on the side of the barrel, there's a little hole, and lots of chateaux pump because it's a lot easier. And we still do it by gravity because it's just a much softer way. It's literally like decanting a bottle. We're decanting a barrel.
Damien, I want to thank you for serving the 2017. Given my bias against the sevens, I never would have bought it myself. But it is smooth, elegant, very balanced, and I'm wondering a little bit about what decisions you had to make in the winemaking process to produce this wine.
Well, they're always the same, year after year. You need to consider the maturity of the skin. So we walk a lot in vineyard to taste the grapes and chew on the skin. This gives you the base. Then you need to look at the quantity of sugar there is, because the more alcohol is a much stronger solvent than water. So the more alcohol you have, the faster the extraction will be. Once you start doing the pump-overs, you taste every day to feel how fast the extraction goes. And some people will say, as soon as you start to get a bit of bitterness, you need to stop. No, you need to stop before this, because you will never lose bitterness. So it's all about tasting every day, and it's always a bit of a gamble, but in 18, you need to be very soft with extraction because there was a lot of alcohol. In 17, there was less alcohol, more acidity, and the tannins were good. So we just kept going. Similar to 16, honestly. To me, 17 for Langlois and Léoville is very similar to 16, similar style. It's just that maybe not that same level of concentration in fruit as 16 has, but very similar.
Great.
I mean, another question on the 17 related was around when will be the optimal drinking window, do you think, for this wine?
Ooh. Well, I can only speak from how I like my wines, because when they're too old, when they're only on tertiary aromas, to me, it lacks a bit of life. I like when there's this perfect combination of age and freshness at the same time. I think the 17 will be lovely in 15 to 20 years, like perfect drinking period. Yeah.
Great. And then another question related to tasting that someone put in the chat earlier was about the Léoville Barton having really a longer finish than some of the other wines, and if that is related in any way to the terroir, and if you have any comments on that.
Langlois is lower on the plateau. So because it's lower on the plateau, the style of wine on these richer soil tend to be larger. If I can put it in a shape, but to me, Langlois is more round, and Léoville is more as a straight line. So Léoville is maybe not as sexy as Langlois can be, but it's so long, and it has really some plots that are not very that don't have a lot of aromas, but the quality of the tannin, the style of the tannin is just so long and so focused. And that to me is all about Léoville. It's this length comes from the terroir. These beautiful gravel we have. No, let me show you a picture of the actual gravel, because I talk a lot about the gravel, but I see you can see what I mean. When we have Cabernet on this soil, it really gives something that's fine tannins and dense, very long. It's yeah, that's just the terroir that shines through it. There's no secrets in the winery to give length to wine. It all comes from the vineyards. 90% of the wine is made in the vineyards. You will never make a good wine if you don't have good grapes. It's I think it's a bit of a lack to me in Bordeaux, where we show people the winery, but we don't spend enough time in the vineyards. And it's a shame because everything happened in the vineyard. This is where it all starts. This is Saint-Julien over here, with the different type of soil. So you have gravel of type 5, which are the big ones that you saw just before next to my boots. Then we have gravel of type 4, all in yellow. And this is the kind of gravel you find in Pauillac. So both Mouton and Lafitte, Cos, Lège-Bage, Pontet-Canet, and gravel of type 4. Gravel type 5 you only find in Saint-Julien, in Margaux, with Château Margaux, Château Palmer, La Bégorce, and you find a little bit in Saint-Estèphe with Montrose. And of course, Latour has it as well. Latour really has a Saint-Julien terroir. And then in between, this is sable argileux de fond de vallée, so clay and sand. So this typically is where we have the Merlot, which is very soft, very round. And over here, this is where we have a mixture of sand and gravel. So that's where we like to have our Cabernet Franc. And over here, we have a bit more clay and some richer soil. And this is actually where we have the Merlot of Léoville. The Merlot of Langois are here. The Merlot of Léoville are here. You can see they're not planted by just pure cotinine. This is where it's richer. There's more humidity, and this is what the Merlot needs. And actually, there's a lot of clay there. So we're not yet to the kind of clay of Petrus, but let me show you a picture. This is the kind of clay we have. So you see there's quite a bit of sand in it, but you can see it's actually blue and orange is where there's more iron. And so this is just perfect soil for Merlot. Some chateaus in Saint-Julien like to have more Merlot because this is really their style of wine. Our approach is to have the best, the grape variety that the best suited for a certain soil. So it's very important for us to know what soils we can put Merlot where there should be Merlot, Cabernet Franc where there should be Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon where there should be Cabernet Sauvignon. We don't really create a style of wine we like. We use what is there to make the wine. And to me, this is also part of the stability and regularity of the wine.
We have a number of different vintages that people are enjoying right now while we're talking. And there was a request to see if you could comment on the 1975 and also the 2000 and the 2001, if you have any thoughts on those vintages.
Oh, 75. Long time I haven't tasted it, but in a whole decade, 75 was regarded as one of the best vintage of this decade. And but there was so much tannin, it took a long time to get approachable because it's very austere, lots of big tannins. And it's one of the only vintage that are still lovely to drink in this decade. And then 2000 and 2001, actually Neil Martin tasted both of these vintages recently because just like me, he was wondering if some 2001 were actually better than 2000 because everybody wanted 2000 to be the great vintage of Bordeaux. And, it is a very good vintage, but I have a soft spot for 2001. So we tasted with Neil Martin 2001 Langlois and 2001 Léville, and it was very fun to have this sort of triangle of, both 2000 next to each other, both 2001 next to each other, and cross. 2000 is still much better. It's more of a serious wine. But I still think it's a bit young. It's still quite muscular. And I love 2001s. Value for money, I think it's a vintage that's been disregarded. And I buy a lot of 2001s because the value is fantastic in this vintage. I've read somewhere, do I have a favorite vintage? Well, for Langlois and Léville. Overall, one of my favorite vintage in Bordeaux is 2001. Langlois 2001 is really good. Léville, I would say 96 Léville would be really one of the vintage where Léville shined. And if you can put your hand on, I'm throwing in there an older vintage, 94s is also a vintage where we've made wonderful wines, and people tend to ignore this vintage, but we've made some brilliant wines in 94. And the more recent vintages, I love our 16s and the 2006 are really getting there. It's their style of wine that I'm I like wine that are very focused, very precise. So it's really this style of wine. If you like wine that tend to be a bit more wide, the fines are really turning into their drinking period.
Excuse me. I'm wondering, like over here, and at least in around where I live, there's issues with like hiring workers and things like that. Do you find that in Bordeaux also now?
Very much so, yes. We are lucky because quite a few workers have left neighbor chateaus to come and work for us. We don't pay better at all, and actually we pay a bit less. But I believe because we're a family business, and I'm there every day, I work in vineyards, and we have a wonderful ambience in the team, and we're very strict with people. If you're not a nice person, you might be good, but we want to have a good atmosphere when we go to work. So we're very strict with people if they're not nice. So people leave actually other chateaus to come and work for us. So that's wonderful. We have out of the 50 workers we have, 10 of them have been working for a longer time than my birth year.
There was a question earlier about whether all the chateaux have the same winemaking teams. Do you have them, so do you have a team for Léoville and a team for Langlois?
No, so the vineyard is managed as one, just like the winery is managed as one. It's really, when we pick the plot, the traceability from the plot to the vat is done. So then we do the blend, we know. But the vineyard is really managed as one. But what is very important though, is because I don't have enough time to walk through the entire vineyard and all the rows every day, because altogether it's about 70 hectares. So we count a lot on all the 25 vignerons. So they look after their plots from pruning to harvest. They don't turn around and maybe one will do the pruning and then another one will do the de-leafing and then another one will do something else. From the beginning to the end, the same man or woman does the same job, does all the job in this plot. So they're really responsible for this plot, so they can be a lot more aware when there's a disease or when they see a movement, or it's kind of their babies. So that's very important. We select the best plots of Langlois to do the Langlois and the best plots of Léville to do the Léville. And what does the plots that does not meet the level, we do a second wine. So there's a common second wine for both, which is the Reserve of Léville.
Triangle chapter would like to compliment Mr. Levy for actually getting all these samples here. This was wonderful. Yesterday, it was a Herculean effort. And I think he did a great job.
Very much so, yes. How about Scott?
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun. Obviously, trying to pack everything from 2 o'clock in the afternoon till 8 o'clock at night till FedEx closed.
Thank you very much, everyone. I hope it was fun. Feel free to come and visit us at any time. We'd love to have you over for not a visual visit, but a real one this time. And thank you for being here.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you,
for
Damien.
organizing this.
À tout à l'heure.
À bientôt.
Au revoir. À tout à l'heure.
Ciao, ciao. Au revoir.
Au revoir. Au revoir, mes amis.